It's been a rough few months for Dead by Daylight. It all started out with the fairly rough release of the Walking Dead update, with there being a number of bugs upon release, as well as the chapter itself feeling slightly unpolished in some areas. We then had the fairly disastrous new addition of Fog Vials, a new Survivor item, which was meant to shake up gameplay a bit, but due to their high power they were nerfed down within about 2 weeks of their release. New lore entries being completely halted. We then had the Chandler rig stream to follow this, which went really poorly and had a lot of technical issues and was just not a good look for the game. We then had the Streetwise bug, which was allowing survivors to get infinite charges on various items, the particularly bad one being a toolbox, which would allow you to infinitely repair gens at a faster speed, which they failed to kill switch for quite some time. Many of these things leading to apologies directly from behavior, which were received not so well by the community. After things had sort of died down a bit on that front, we then had the following patch come out, which was quite a beefy one when it comes to a controversy, with suggestion of new anti-slug and anti-tunnel systems that would completely change how the game functioned, as well as reworks to well-loved characters like Myers, and some fairly underwhelming new perks and perk changes. Now, with this all said, I don't want this to be a rant video or anything like that, because that's not really what I'm about, to be honest. And before we start discussing these issues some more, I do want to highlight some positive things that have also happened over the last few months, as I think these things are often lost. The big one, of course, is the FNAF chapter itself, the biggest chapter the game has ever seen, and a real positive period, I think, for the community, where everyone was sort of just enjoying the game and loving this new chapter, this chapter everyone had asked for so long. We further had the introduction of the Grimoire and the Choose Your Own chapter, with us slowly designing a cool new angel killer, which is going to be really awesome. 2v8 having a huge win with its play while you wait system, which hopefully will come to the main mode as well. A number of changes to things that have been sort of useless for years, like maps and keys. An awesome new set of teasers for the new killer, the Krasue, and the Sinister Grace chapter as a whole. It's really nice to see that marketing return. And the Walking Dead chapter, whilst it did have a bunch of issues, the content itself was actually pretty great. The new characters of Rick and Michonne and Daryl are all pretty awesome. So just for a bit of balance, I wanted to name a few good things that have been going on recently as well. It's not all doom and gloom, and I think people can quite easily get wrapped up in these things, so I think it's always important to remember the positive things happening within the community as well. However, I did want to talk about some of the negative things today, because it's been a trend over the last few months, and it's been something that's honestly been kind of getting to me, which is something that fairly rarely happens, I would say, for updates like these. Generally speaking, I try to stay fairly positive when it comes to my mindset on the game, because I've seen the game through a whole lot of states, and I always know, for the most part, it's going to come out the other end looking okay. But the last few months, and the negativity of the last few months, have honestly been quite tough, I think. And there's been a few standout reasons why. The number one thing for me, I think, too, is down to priorities. And what I mean by this is the priorities of certain things that are being focused on within the game. I have the feeling that there's so much more in the game that needs fixing and changing or reworking, so it feels sort of odd to me when we get focuses on characters like Myers, say. Now, the Myers rework has been met with sort of a 50-50 response, I'd say. Half the people like him, half the people sort of hate him. I'm more leaning to the side of dislike personally, because I enjoyed the old Myers and I liked his whole vibe. The main thing I don't understand about this rework is why it was any form of priority before so many other killer reworks even, let alone other areas of the game that need this help far more. Myers was kind of weak, sure, but he was well liked, people played him, and he wasn't that problematic. On the other hand, we have a character like Skull Merchant who's been soft kill switched for almost a year now, with her rework seemingly coming in early 2026. We have other characters with absolutely abysmal play rates like Twins, Hag, Dredge and Howlmaster, all characters who I think could use tweaks and a bit of help. I guess I'm just not quite sure why out of everyone, Myers needs the help now. It sort of just feels like messing with something that isn't broken, and whilst I don't hate it by any means, I'm just a bit confused as to why this was needed at all, and why it was any form of priority above so many other characters that need reworks, add-on overhauls, pretty much just anything else. There's so many more other characters I think which need help over Myers. One thing that's made me quite sad fairly recently with the new chapter of the Krasue as well is how these slugging and anti-tunnel changes that have been suggested on the PTB have completely overshadowed the chapter and the talk around it. I find this really disappointing after such a good marketing run, that a lot of the hype it felt for that chapter has been just so greatly overshadowed by the negativity toward the changes, which won't even be making it to the game now. When a new chapter launches, it feels like it should be a time where things are positive, people are excited for the new content, they're ready to engage with the new stuff and have fun testing it out. I think it's just a bit of a shame that this PTB worked out that way. I really hope in the future when they do these, they test them maybe in the mid-chapter, when they tend to release more bug-related fixes and small reworks and stuff like that. I think this would be the perfect time to try and test this stuff, because it really feel like it overshadowed the Krasue PTB to me, which made me particularly sad in this case because of how well it was marketed and how much I was excited to go test out the character. Yet when I looked online and within the community, it was largely about these changes because they were so outrageous and extreme, and all at once as well, testing slugging changes and anti-tunnel changes all alongside this new killer. I just hope in the future they sort of split things up a bit more. I think particularly from new releases, especially killers. Zooming out further as well from killers specifically, it feels like there's been a bunch of things that have just been sort of left for so long now. A map like Swampsay, I remember there being talk of a rework I think at the beginning of the year. It was the only map I believe which didn't go through the Realm Beyond update, the visual upgrade that almost every other map got. And I'm just a bit confused, like what's happening with that? I don't really understand what's going on there. We further got additions this year of the new Walking Dead map, which in all fairness I do like the vibe of. I think it's a nice looking map and I think they really got the tone right, but it doesn't seem to be that great a map. And it was incredibly weird too because this map wasn't even mentioned on the roadmap, and there was confusion around whether it was meant to be a map to begin with. These things all just sort of confuse me a bit. I'm not too sure what happened there or what this map was meant to be. It even seemed to have abysmally low drop rates for the first month or so of its release, which is really bizarre. And it's another thing that feels in some ways like it's just bloating the game a bit more, which I think has been the core problem, by the way, that has caused many of the issues we've been seeing recently. So that's the next thing I want to talk about is bloat. The main reason, I think, for the ever-growing pool of bugs is because we get so much content added over and over again, month to month, that it means there's never enough time to fix the bugs of those patches. So a new patch is added, it has some bugs, but they can't quite fix all the bugs in time, so when the next patch drops, there's a whole new wave of bugs, but there's still some bugs left over from the last one, and this just builds and builds and builds, and luckily they have addressed this by saying they're going to push the next chapter back to January, which is a long wait by the way. But I think the core problem here is that they need to potentially reevaluate how much they're adding to the game, because I think it's coming to the point where it's genuinely harming it in some ways, even in the form of some of the new perks. I would say there's a bunch of perks with the Sinister Grace chapter where I sort of question, like, what's the point of adding this perk? I'm wondering what purpose do they fulfill aside being a new thing. The same goes for perks released with the Walking Dead chapter. There's a number of them I've already just completely forgotten. It feels like there's far too many now being added, particularly on the Survivor side. I think there's so many overlapping or close effects that feel like they could potentially just be rolled into one in some ways. My hope for this health update is that during this time, they spend the time reworking and changing things around, and use this almost as a testing period for if they could go the route of reworking things rather than adding new things all the time. I think the game would benefit so much more from persistent perk reworks over constant consistently adding new perks, similar to maps as well. I think maps would benefit greatly from persistent map reworks rather than always adding new ones, which seem just a bit poorly conceived, I think, design-wise. The bloat of the game, I think, is getting far too much, and I truly hope this health update addresses it. The other recent thing has been queue times as well. Queue times has been an ever-growing issue, queue times becoming excessively long, and it's particularly prominent whilst 2v8 is active, but even in the regular modes it feels quite extensive, and they have fixed this in some ways with the queue whilst you wait system for 2v8, but in 1v4 this doesn't really fix the issue. So quite simply, I hope they introduce this into 1v4 in some way, or there's just improvements made, I think, particularly to the Survivor side. I think this year, as a whole, we've seen a lot of positive things for killers, a lot of new content for them, but I think survivors have been relatively neglected in terms of new stuff. It's been getting better recently, but I think the core issue is simply that Survivor is getting less and less interesting over time. Despite Survivor debatably being a lot stronger at the moment as well, no one's really that interested in playing them, which I think is quite telling. Communication. When it comes to the communication side of things, I hope this is kept up. They've made some definite promises to try and improve these things surrounding issues we've had recently, like with the Streetwise kill switch issue, the Chandler rig stream, and just the health and state of the game as a whole. It does seem to be improving, but I think it's something really key to keep up for the community's sake. Because all this stuff, for me at least personally, it doesn't necessarily make me angry, it just makes me feel sort of disappointed. It makes me just wish it would go better. Because more than anything, these things not going well and the game having a bit of a flop period is just kinda tiring. It can feel quite exhausting, I think, to be a part of all of it where there's so much negativity. It starts to just get quite draining, I think. PTB Testing. In regards to the recent anti-slugging and anti-tunnel changes or ideas for those changes that were put forward on the PTB, these weren't necessarily bad, I think, but it was a lot at once, and it does make it hard to test, I think, even for the community. These are two huge things, and they seemed also wildly overtuned or sort of out of touch with what people were expecting. And whilst I do agree, it's a PTB, it's for testing, absolutely on board with that, it did feel a bit unnecessary almost, a bit too extreme. And like I said, it felt like it kind of overshadowed Krasue, which I think was just really disappointing and just a huge shame. In some ways it can make the PTB feel like a bit of a waste sometimes, I think, because it just feels like, why are we testing this when we know it's this insanely overtuned, ill-fitting mechanic for the game? Again, I think especially because there's multiple of these coming in all at once, it creates this huge mess of an update really. One thing at a time, I think, is the way to go in regards to these huge gameplay changing updates. So let's talk about the health update that they're planning. From now, or the release of the Krasue around September, up till January is going to be when the next chapter drops. So there's almost a 4-month break now between chapters, which again is quite worrying. My main hope for this period, and the main thing I hope they focus on, aside obviously bug fixing and getting things into a more stable state, I hope they focus on reworking lots of things. Looking at the Survivor side in particular, I think, and really just assessing what makes that role fun, trying to figure out ways to improve it, trying to rework perks to engage survivors a bit more again. For the killer side, I hope we have focus on a variety of killers. Killers who could use things like add-on overhauls. I'd really love to see that during this time. Huge add-on overhauls. A character who hugely benefited from this recently was Pyramid Head. He finally got his add-on overhaul and he feels so much better now. So much better. But there's still a number of characters who direly need an add-on overhaul of some kind. Characters like Demogorgon, Oni, Sadako and Dredgehead debate as well, Skull Merchant obviously, Deathslinger, and there's surely someone I'm forgetting too. But the point being that these things really help. The other thing I hope they focus on is really looking at what the issue is, I suppose, with lots of the current killers. Lots of killers that have been left behind with the times, that have simply not been able to keep up with the game. Characters like Hag, Ghostface, Trapper, Legion, and Trickster. There's so many characters who I think could just use a bit more, use some adjustment to their gameplay, because they're really suffering at the moment as a result of how the game works nowadays. Many characters have been left behind over the years. I think many of these changes too are worth doing beyond that 4-month window. For future chapters, I wouldn't be against there being a possibility of adding maybe 2 perks per character or 1 perk per character in the future, because I think adding 3 every time is simply just becoming too much. Maps are an area that needs to be looked at, and an area I would argue actually could be sort of soft kill switch for a while, and we wouldn't really be missing out on all too much. Soft kill switching some of the more problematic maps, and sort of reworking them in the meantime, due to maps being such a huge contributing factor currently to the game's health as a whole, I would say. Hopefully by the end of this patch and the end of this health period, we will have a more stable game, and hopefully not just in the sense of the game itself, but also in terms of balance and the gameplay, as we've been going through some pretty sketchy periods, I would say, recently, in regards to both of these things. So yeah, I think that's gonna do it. I do hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts as always down below. I felt the need to talk about some of these things going on, at least in some aspect. Generally speaking, for many of these things, I would just move past them. Lots of people talk about these things, and they go into far more detail and tend to talk about them far better than I ever could, which is why I tend to avoid the topics. I often just feel like I don't really have much to add on the situation. But I felt the need to say something, I think, about the huge list of things that felt like they've been going wrong recently, as the negativity and the constant down feeling of the community has admittedly been kind of getting to me. And it's something that's just really sad to see overall, because I truly love the game, and I really want it to do well, and I want it to continue doing well over the years. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye.